What happens when a humble-looking man walks into an elite restaurant only to be humiliated by a waitress who thinks he doesn't belong? But what she doesn't know will change everything. Stay tuned to see the shocking twist. Like and subscribe for more incredible stories. The mysterious guest and the judgmental gaze. Beverly Hills shimmered under the dazzling glow of neon signs and luxury storefronts. It was a city of wealth, power, and social status, where appearances meant everything. Tonight, the renowned Lumiere restaurant was packed with elite patrons. Business moguls, Hollywood celebrities, and socialites occupied the grand dining hall, sipping expensive wine under the crystal chandeliers. The ambiance was one of exclusivity, where only the rich and influential dined. A sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the valet outside the restaurant, and a doorman in a neatly pressed uniform promptly opened the door for an elegant couple, their designer outfits shimmering under the warm streetlights. Just behind them, unnoticed by all, a lone figure stepped onto the sidewalk. Unlike the flashy clientele entering Lumiere, this man wore faded jeans, scuffed boots, and a well-worn leather jacket. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, and there was a quiet humility in his posture. As he stepped inside, the warmth of the restaurant contrasted sharply with the cool evening air. The smell of aged wine, fresh truffles, and sizzling steak filled the air, but no one paid him any attention. That was until Ashley, one of Lumiere's most senior waitresses, noticed him. Ashley was the kind of person who prided herself on recognizing class at a glance. She had spent years perfecting the art of categorizing people based on their wealth and status. To her, the restaurant wasn't just a place to work. It was a stage for the elite, a place where only the most sophisticated and well-dressed belonged. And as she watched the newcomer step toward the reception desk, her lips curled into an amused smirk. "Oh boy, another lost soul who thinks he can just walk in here," she muttered under her breath, nudging a fellow waiter. The other waiter glanced at the man but said nothing, clearly uncomfortable with Ashley's sharp tongue. But Ashley had already set her mind. This man didn't belong. She sauntered toward the front desk with a calculated grace, her uniform pristine, her hair in a perfect bun. Every step was measured, rehearsed. She thrived on these moments, when she could exercise her power over those she deemed unworthy. When she reached the reception area, the man was standing calmly, looking at the menu on a nearby stand. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't looking around nervously like most who accidentally wandered into places beyond their means. His demeanor was composed, but there was something about him, a quiet confidence, a self-assurance that didn't match his clothing. Ashley, however, didn't see that. She saw a nobody in old clothes. With a fake smile plastered on her face, she cleared her throat, ensuring that nearby guests could hear what she was about to say. "Good evening, sir," she began, her voice dripping with artificial politeness. "Are you lost?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if surprised by the question. "No, I'm here for dinner." Ashley's eyes flickered with amusement, but she quickly composed herself. "I see. Well, Lumiere is an exclusive establishment. We cater to a certain clientele. Are you sure this is where you want to dine?" Her words were carefully chosen, subtle enough to sound polite, but filled with unspoken condescension. She knew how to make someone feel small without being outright rude. But instead of looking embarrassed or uncertain, the man simply smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Yes, I'd like a table." Ashley barely contained a scoff. She had dealt with people like this before. Wannabe big shots trying to impress a date. Out-of-towners who thought they could sneak in just to say they had dined at Lumiere. She had no patience for them. Glancing at the reservation list, she didn't bother to check it properly. Instead, she typed his name in with exaggerated flair, pretending to search. After a few seconds of dramatic key tapping, she sighed. "Well, as I suspected, you don't have a reservation." The man didn't react. "That's okay. I don't mind waiting." Ashley narrowed her eyes. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't making excuses or trying to explain himself. Something about his calmness irritated her. She crossed her arms. "Sir, just so you know, we have a dress code. Jackets, tailored suits, elegant evening wear. You're a little underdressed for our usual guests." A couple standing nearby overheard the conversation and smirked. casting sideways glances at the mysterious guest. A woman in a gold gown whispered something to her partner, both chuckling under their breath. Still, the man remained unfazed. "I'm comfortable with what I'm wearing." Ashley let out a small, amused laugh, shaking her head. "Okay then, if you insist." She turned on her heel and led him toward the worst table in the house. A table for the unwanted instead of seating him near the grand dining hall where chandeliers cast golden light over white linen tablecloths. Ashley took him to a dimly lit corner next to the kitchen doors. The faint smell of dishwater lingered in the air, and every few minutes waiters rushed in and out, carrying plates and silverware. This was where they seated guests they didn't want to be seen, too close to the clatter of plates, too far from the elegance of the restaurant. Ashley pulled out the chair with an exaggerated motion and dropped the menu onto the table with a loud thud. "Here you go, a nice private table, perfect for someone like you." The man glanced around, then back at Ashley, his smile never fading. "Thank you. I'm sure this will be interesting." Ashley smirked. "Let's see how long you last." As she walked away, she leaned toward another waitress and whispered just loud enough for others to hear. "He won't last 5 minutes. Bet he'll leave as soon as he sees the menu." Across the room, an older gentleman with silver hair had been quietly observing the entire exchange. He took a slow sip of his wine, watching the scene unfold with intrigue. Ashley, meanwhile, disappeared back into the crowd, satisfied that she had done her part to remind this man of his place. What she didn't realize was that the night was far from over, and the man she had just dismissed was about to change everything. The underestimated guest. Keanu Reeves sat calmly at the dimly lit table near the kitchen, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. He picked up the menu, scanning through the fine print without any rush. The scent of sizzling steak and freshly baked bread filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of classical piano music drifting through the restaurant. Across the room, Ashley watched him with amusement, waiting for the moment he would realize his mistake and leave. In her experience, men like him, those who walked in wearing worn-out clothes and thinking they could belong in a place like this, never lasted long. She smirked and whispered to a fellow waiter, "He's just stalling. Give it 5 minutes tops." But 5 minutes passed, then 10. Keanu remained seated, unfazed. Finally, with an air of exaggerated boredom, Ashley strolled back to his table, notepad in hand. "So have you decided? Or do you need a recommendation?" Her tone was syrupy sweet, but the condescension was unmistakable. Keanu looked up from the menu and pointed at one of the most expensive dishes, filet de boeuf rossini, $350 per plate. Ashley nearly choked on her own breath. For the first time, she faltered. "Oh," she blinked, regaining her composure quickly. "Sir, just to confirm, you do realize this dish is $350, right?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, it sounds wonderful." Ashley's lips twitched. This had to be a joke. "Well, all right then. I just want to make sure there are no surprises when the bill arrives." Keanu's smile remained unchanged. "I appreciate your concern." Ashley bit back her frustration, scribbling the order down with an unnecessary flourish. Before she walked away, she turned back with a smirk. "Oh, and just so you know, our restaurant has a 20% minimum tipping policy. Keep that in mind." Keanu merely nodded. "Noted." Ashley strutted off, shaking her head. This was going to be fun. A game of patience. Instead of taking Keanu's order to the kitchen immediately, Ashley deliberately stalled. First, she stopped to chat with a well-dressed couple at a nearby table, laughing at an inside joke she barely understood. Then she delivered a cocktail to a table that wasn't even in her section. Meanwhile, Keanu waited, patiently. Minutes passed, then more. At a nearby table, the older gentleman who had been observing the situation frowned. He watched as Ashley passed by Keanu's table multiple times, completely ignoring him. After a while, the gentleman, dressed in a navy blue suit, his silver hair neatly combed, decided enough was enough. He stood adjusting his cufflinks and strolled toward Keanu's table with effortless grace. When he arrived, he offered a polite nod. "Good evening, young man. I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I couldn't help but notice. You seem to have been waiting for quite some time." Keanu looked up and smiled warmly. "No worries. I don't mind waiting." The older man chuckled, leaning slightly toward him. Patience is a virtue indeed, but sometimes it's also a test of one's character. Before Keanu could respond, Ashley suddenly appeared, her voice sharp and polished. "Excuse me, sir, but I wouldn't want you disturbing our guest." The older gentleman raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Oh, I was merely saying hello." Ashley gave an exaggerated sigh, gesturing toward the gentleman's table. "Perhaps you should return to your table and enjoy your meal." Keanu simply watched the exchange, his eyes steady but unreadable. The older man gave him a small, knowing smile before nodding politely and walking back to his seat. Ashley, completely oblivious to her mistake, turned to Keanu with a smirk. "Your order should be out soon, but you know these kinds of dishes are best enjoyed by those who truly appreciate fine dining. Hope it meets your expectations." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "I'm sure it will." Frustrated that she still hadn't gotten a reaction from him, Ashley stormed off toward the bar. The tables began to turn behind the bar. Ashley leaned toward a coworker who had been trying to avoid her all evening. "He's pretending to be polite, but I can tell he's uncomfortable. People like him come here to feel important, but they always end up embarrassing themselves." Her coworker, clearly uneasy, muttered, "Maybe he just wants to have dinner, Ashley. Maybe we should treat him like any other customer." Ashley scoffed. "Did you see those boots he's wearing? He doesn't belong here, and if he can't handle it, he shouldn't have walked through that door." Unbeknownst to her, the elegant couple from earlier had been listening. The woman, dressed in a flowing emerald gown, shook her head in disapproval. "She's awful," she whispered to her husband. "That man has been nothing but polite, and she keeps trying to humiliate him." "I agree," the husband replied, his jaw tightening. "It's disgraceful. I think we should speak to the manager." At the same time, the older gentleman at the nearby table raised his wine glass in Keanu's direction, a subtle show of support. Keanu responded with a slight nod, a soft smile playing on his lips. Ashley, meanwhile, was completely unaware that the tide of the evening was beginning to shift. An unexpected development. When Ashley finally decided to bring out Keanu's meal, she made sure to take her time. First, she stopped in the kitchen to chat with the chefs, leaving his dish under the warming lamp longer than necessary. Then she attended to a table that wasn't even hers, casually ignoring the fact that his plate was ready. Finally, when she couldn't stall any longer, she grabbed the plate and dropped it onto his table with a careless thud. "Here's your order. I hope you enjoy it." Then with a fake syrupy smile, she added, "And if you don't, let us know. We can always find something more affordable." A few nearby patrons gasped softly. They had seen enough. But Keanu, he simply picked up his fork and knife. "It looks excellent, thank you." Ashley narrowed her eyes. "Are you sure? It's a very sophisticated dish. Might be difficult for someone who's not used to it." Keanu glanced up at her, his eyes steady. "I'm sure." Ashley let out an exaggerated sigh and turned away, missing the murmurs spreading through the restaurant. What she didn't realize was that the elegant couple had already summoned the restaurant manager. And at that very moment, the manager was on his way, completely unaware that he was about to walk into the biggest mistake of Ashley's career. The breaking point. Ashley strutted away from Keanu's table, her smirk widening as she passed by a table of VIP guests. She leaned in toward one of her regulars, a well-known Hollywood producer, and whispered just loud enough for surrounding guests to hear, "Some people just don't know their place, do they?" The producer chuckled, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. "You've got to admire the confidence, though," he mused, thinking he can just waltz in here and blend in. Ashley grinned, satisfied with herself. The night was going just as she expected. That man in the old boots and worn-out jeans would soon regret ever stepping foot into Lumiere. But what she didn't realize was that the tide was about to turn, and hard. The moment of truth. Across the dining room, the restaurant manager, a man in his mid-50s with an air of strict professionalism, was swiftly making his way toward Keanu's table. He had been summoned by more than one concerned guest, and by the time he arrived, the entire energy of the restaurant had shifted. Keanu had just finished his meal when Ashley returned with the bill, her eyes glinting with anticipation. She placed the checkbook in front of him and tapped the leather cover twice, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I hope everything was to your liking. And, Just so we're clear, gratuity is not included. We expect a minimum of 20%. A few nearby patrons turned their heads, their curiosity piqued. Ashley's smugness was almost tangible. Keanu simply nodded, picked up the checkbook, and opened it. The moment he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek, jet-black card, the air in the room shifted. Ashley's smirk faltered. Wait, is that? Before she could even process what was happening, the manager appeared beside her, his expression tight, his posture rigid. Mr. Reeves, my sincerest apologies, sir. The words hit Ashley like a freight train. Her stomach dropped. Her palms grew clammy. The name echoed in her mind. Reeves. Number, no way. But the confirmation came when the manager bowed slightly, his face etched with an anxious smile. We had no idea you were dining with us tonight. Please allow me to personally handle your check. Your meal, of course, is complimentary. The entire restaurant fell silent. Nearby guests gasped, exchanged looks, whispered frantically. The elegant couple who had been watching earlier nodded to each other knowingly. Ashley stood frozen, her throat tightening. She had been mocking, belittling, and humiliating one of the owners of Lumiere. Keanu closed the checkbook calmly, then slowly looked up at Ashley, his gaze unreadable. No need for that, he said to the manager, his voice steady. I'd prefer to pay. The manager nodded quickly. Of course, sir. Absolutely. Keanu turned his attention back to Ashley. But before we do that, I think we need to have a conversation. The fall of Ashley. The silence in the restaurant was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every guest, every waiter, even the bartender stopped what they were doing. Ashley felt the heat rising to her face. The manager, his patience now gone, turned toward her, his voice stern. Ashley, I think you owe Mr. Reeves an explanation. Ashley opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice still calm, but carrying a quiet authority that silenced the entire room. Tell me, Ashley, he said slowly. What made you think I didn't belong here? She swallowed hard. Her once arrogant demeanor had crumbled into dust. I didn't know, she stammered. Keanu tilted his head. Didn't know. What? That I was one of the restaurant's owners? That I had money? That I was worthy of being here? Ashley felt like the room was closing in on her. The older gentleman, the one who had quietly observed everything, now spoke up from his table. His voice was deep and measured. What you didn't know, young lady, he said, swirling his wine, is that true class isn't about what someone wears. It's about how they treat others. The words landed like a slap. Ashley's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. The elegant couple nearby nodded in agreement. The woman, still in her emerald gown, whispered to her husband, "This is exactly the lesson she needed." The ultimate lesson. Keanu stood up, slipping his card back into his jacket. Ashley, the truth is, I don't care how you treated me. I've been in worse places. I've met people like you before, and I'll meet more in the future. Ashley flinched. But what I do care about, he continued, his voice firm, is that you made an assumption, that you treated someone as less than just because they didn't look the way you expected them to. He paused, letting his words sink in. Ashley, for once, couldn't argue. She couldn't justify herself, because he was right. The manager crossed his arms. Ashley, I'll need a word with you after your shift. But for now, please, step away from the table. Ashley nodded stiffly, turning on her heel and disappearing toward the back of the restaurant, her humiliation complete. Keanu took a deep breath, looking around the room. Every guest was still watching, waiting. This restaurant was built on a simple idea, he said, his voice carrying through the space, that everyone who walks through these doors deserves respect. And I think tonight was a reminder of why that matters. A few guests nodded, some even clapped softly. The older gentleman raised his wine glass. Well said. Keanu gave him a small nod of appreciation, then turned back to the manager. Let's talk later. I have some ideas about how we can make Lumiere better. With that, he grabbed his coat, nodded at the remaining staff, and walked toward the door. As he stepped outside, the bright lights of Beverly Hills shimmered in the night. For Keanu, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about a lesson. And somewhere inside the restaurant, Ashley was learning it the hard way. Redemption or regret. The aftermath. As the heavy doors of Lumiere swung shut behind Keanu Reeves, the entire restaurant exhaled, as if it had been collectively holding its breath. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Stolen glances flickered toward the back of the restaurant where Ashley had disappeared, and the tension that had built throughout the night lingered like the final notes of a fading symphony. At the bar, the elegant couple clinked their glasses together, their voices barely above a whisper. "You know," the woman said, swirling her wine, "I doubt she'll ever forget tonight." "If she's smart, she won't," her husband replied, taking a measured sip. Meanwhile, the older gentleman, the one who had silently supported Keanu all evening, finished the last of his drink. He set his glass down with a thoughtful nod, his eyes reflecting satisfaction, but also curiosity. Would Ashley learn from this? Or would she leave Lumiere tonight with nothing but anger and bitterness? The answer lay in the back room, where Ashley stood before her furious manager. The moment of reckoning. Ashley had been in trouble before. She had received warnings for her arrogance, for her tendency to dismiss anyone she deemed unworthy of Lumiere's atmosphere. But never had she miscalculated this badly. She stood stiffly, hands clasped together, her palms damp with sweat. The restaurant manager, his face stone-cold with disappointment, exhaled sharply and folded his arms. "Ashley," he began, his tone controlled but brimming with suppressed anger, "do you realize what you've done tonight?" She swallowed, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't know who he was," the manager scoffed. "And that's your excuse? That you treated a guest like trash because you didn't recognize him?" Ashley winced. "I didn't mean to." "You meant every word, Ashley," he interrupted. "Every smirk, every snide remark, every delay. You meant all of it." Her cheeks burned with humiliation. She had no defense. The manager took a step forward, his voice lowering in a way that somehow carried more weight than if he had shouted. "Do you understand the reputation of this place? The level of hospitality we demand? The fact that one of our owners, one of the men who signs your paycheck, was treated like a second-class citizen under your watch?" Ashley's mouth went dry. The reality of her actions was finally sinking in. She had been so caught up in gatekeeping an image, so obsessed with deciding who belonged and who didn't, that she had humiliated not just a guest, but the very person responsible for keeping this restaurant alive. The manager sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Reeves requested a staff meeting after closing. You will be there. And depending on how you handle yourself, Ashley, you may not have a job tomorrow." Her heart plummeted. She had one chance left. A lesson in humility. The restaurant closed at midnight, but no one went home. Instead, the entire staff gathered in the main dining hall, waiting for the moment that could either be a lesson or a reckoning. Keanu Reeves stood at the center, still in his modest outfit, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed but his presence undeniable. Every eye was on him. Some were nervous, some were ashamed, others were simply waiting to see what he would do. Ashley sat near the back, stiff and silent, dread pooling in her stomach. Keanu let a long, thoughtful silence pass before he spoke. "We all make mistakes," he began, "but what matters is what we do after those mistakes." His voice was steady, but it carried weight. "Tonight something happened that wasn't just about bad service. It was about judgment, assumptions, bias, and that's a problem." No one spoke. Keanu's gaze drifted straight to Ashley. She barely breathed. "Ashley," he said, his tone not harsh but measured, "you made a choice tonight, a choice to look at someone and decide, without knowing anything about them, that they didn't deserve to be here." The staff shifted uncomfortably. Ashley forced herself to look at him, though her throat felt tight. "I—" She started, then stopped. Her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She took a deep breath, and for the first time that night, she dropped the facade. "You're right," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I judged you. I thought I knew who should be here and who shouldn't. I thought I was protecting the restaurant's image. But the truth is, I was just being cruel." Her voice cracked slightly and she blinked rapidly, trying to keep herself together. Keanu didn't look triumphant. He didn't look smug. He just nodded. We all have biases. We all make assumptions. But how we choose to change, that's what matters. Another silence. Then Ashley spoke again, her voice firmer this time. I want to be better. For the first time that night, Keanu smiled. Then prove it. Ashley nodded. And just like that, she understood that this wasn't just about her job. This was about her character. A new beginning. As the meeting ended, the staff dispersed, murmuring amongst themselves. Some were inspired, some were humbled, and some, like Ashley, were forever changed. Keanu didn't wait for congratulations or applause. He simply grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, into the warm California night. As he walked down the illuminated streets of Beverly Hills, he thought about what had just transpired. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating someone for their mistake. It was about planting a seed. Some people would learn, some wouldn't. But tonight, Ashley had been given a choice. And what she did next, that was up to her. As Keanu disappeared into the city lights, one final thought remained. In a world where you can be anything, choose to be kind.